Commander Yao Chen stood on the bridge of the UE's Meridian and stared at the damaged ship floating in the darkness of space. The vessel was small and broken and drifting without power, and her sensors showed only one life sign inside. What species? Is it? She asked her science officer, Lieutenant Park. Checked his readings 3 times before answering, because he could not believe what he was seeing. Valari. Commander. The bridge went silent, and every crew member looked at each other with worry in their eyes, because everyone knew what the Valari were, and everyone knew what happened to anyone who helped them. The Valari were prey, and they had been prey for thousands of years, and the Kethari Dominion hunted them across the galaxy for sport and for slaves, and no one ever helped them, because helping them meant making enemies with one of the most powerful empires in known space. Yao did not care about any of that. Prepare the shuttle bay, she said, and her voice was calm and steady. Her first officer stepped closer and spoke in a low voice, so the others would not hear. Commander. If we take in a Valari, the Dominion will find out, and they will come for us, and Earth Command will not be happy about this. Yao turned to look at him, and her eyes were hard. There is a child dying on that ship, Marcus, and I'm not going to watch it happen. She left the bridge and walked to the shuttle bay herself, and she took a medical team with her, and they crossed the cold space between the 2 ships in minutes. The Valari vessel was dark inside, and the air was thin and cold. And Yao used her flashlight to find her way through the narrow halls. She found the survivor in a small room at the back of the ship. It was a child. The little creature was curled up in a corner and shaking with fear and cold, and its opalescent skin had lost most of its shine, and its large dark eyes stared at Yao with pure terror. Yao had seen many things in her years in space, and she had faced pirates and storms and the emptiness between stars, but nothing had ever made her heart hurt the way this small trembling creature did. She knelt down slowly and carefully, and she did not make any sudden movements. "Hey there, little one," she said softly, and her voice was gentle and warm. The child pressed itself harder against the wall and made a small whimpering sound. Yao looked around the room and saw the bodies of what must have been the child's family, and she understood now why the little one was so afraid and so alone. She took off her jacket and moved very slowly toward the child, and the medical team behind her stayed quiet and still. "I'm not going to hurt you," she said, and she held out the jacket like an offering. The child stared at her with those huge dark eyes, and Yao could see the fear slowly mixing with something else, and maybe it was hope, or maybe it was just exhaustion. She wrapped the jacket around the small shaking body, and she felt the child flinch at first, but then slowly relax into the warmth. "There you go," Yao whispered, and she carefully picked up the little creature and held it against her chest. The child weighed almost nothing, and its skin was cool to the touch, and Yao could feel the rapid beating of its 3 hearts. She carried the child back through the dark ship and into the shuttle, and the medical team followed in silence. When they returned to the Meridian, the entire crew was waiting, and they all stared at the small bundle in their commander's arms. Dr. Amara Asay rushed forward with blankets and scanners and questions, but Yao held up one hand. "Food and water first," she said, and she carried the child to the medical bay herself. The little Valari did not speak, and the crew was not sure if it could not speak or if it was simply too scared to try. They gave it warm broth and clean water and soft blankets, and they dimmed the lights because the child seemed to prefer the darkness. Yao stayed by its side for hours, and she talked to it in a calm, quiet voice, even though she did not know if it understood her words. "You are safe now," she said again and again, and maybe she was saying it for the child, and maybe she was saying it for herself. The crew started calling the child Fawn because of its large eyes and gentle movements, and the name stuck, even though they did not know the child's real name. Lieutenant Park came to the medical bay that night with a report. "Commander, I intercepted a transmission from a nearby trading post, and they are talking about us, and they are saying that the humans took in a Valari. Yao looked at the sleeping child and then back at Park. Let them talk. The Dominion will hear about this. I know. Park hesitated at the door, and he wanted to say something more, but he could see that Yao had made her choice, and nothing would change her mind. Earth Command sent an angry message the next morning, and they used words like protocol and diplomatic incident and unauthorized action. But Yao did not respond to their demands. She sat beside Fawn and watched the child sleep, and she thought about all the rules she was breaking and all the trouble that was coming. But then Fawn opened its eyes and looked at her, and for the first time, the child did not look afraid. It reached out one small hand and touched the sleeve of Yao's uniform and made a soft sound that might have been a question. Yes, Yao said, and she took the small hand in her own and held it gently. You can stay with us, and no one is going to take you away, and I promise you that. She did not know if the child understood her words, but it seemed to understand her meaning because it closed its eyes again. And this time, when it slept, there was something like peace on its face. The bridge crew watched their commander through the medical bay windows, and they saw her sitting there with the alien child. And they knew that something had changed. They had all signed up for exploration and science and the mapping of distant stars, but now they were part of something different and something dangerous, and not one of them wanted to be anywhere else. The word continued to spread across the galaxy through trade routes and refugee camps and whispered conversations in dark corners of space stations. The humans had taken in a Valari child, and they had done it without asking for anything in return, and they had done it knowing what it might cost them. For species who had lived in fear for generations, this was more than just news. It was a spark of something they had forgotten existed, and sparks have a way of starting fires. The first ship arrived 17 days after the Meridian rescued Fawn. It was an old freighter with scorch marks on its hull and a captain who had one arm hanging useless at his side, and his name was Torvik, and he was a Desic, which meant he had gray leathery skin and 4 eyes and a voice like grinding stones. He hailed the Meridian from a safe distance, and his message was simple. I heard you helped someone who had no one else, and I want to know if the stories are true, Commander. Yao Chun went to the communications console herself and looked at the battered ship on her screen. What stories did you hear? That you took in a Valari child, and that you did not ask for payment, and that you are protecting it even though the Dominion wants it back. Yao felt her crew watching her and waiting for her answer. The stories are true. Torvik was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was different and softer. Somehow pirates attacked my ship 3 months ago, and they killed my crew, and they took everything I had, and they left me with this dead arm and nowhere to go, and every station I have visited has turned me away because I cannot pay, and I cannot work. He paused, and Yao could hear the shame in his voice. I'm not asking for charity, and I will work however I can, but I just need somewhere to rest and heal, and maybe find a reason to keep going. Yao did not hesitate. Come aboard, Captain Torvik, and we will find you a place. The second ship arrived 2 days later, and this one carried a family of Morwen refugees. The Morwen were small creatures with hard shells on their backs and delicate hands made for building and creating, and their homeworld had been strip mined by a corporation that did not care about the people living there. There were 12 of them in total, and the youngest was barely old enough to walk, and they had nothing left but the shells on their backs and the hope that someone somewhere might care. The third arrival was not a ship, but a single escape pod, and inside was a Crick scientist named Velith, who had been exiled from her own people for refusing to create a biological weapon. She was thin and tired, and her purple scales had lost their color from stress and hunger. I did not know where else to go, she told Yao when they brought her aboard. You came to the right place, Yao replied. More came after that. A group of traders who had been blacklisted for refusing to carry slaves arrived with 2 damaged ships and empty cargo holds a young couple from a species Yal had never seen before came seeking safety after their government tried to force them into arranged marriages with powerful families. An elderly scholar who had been expelled from his university for teaching forbidden history arrived with nothing but a bag of old books and a lifetime of knowledge. Each of them had heard the same story passed through trade posts and refugee camps and whispered in the dark corners of stations where the desperate gathered. The humans helped someone, and they did not ask for anything in return. Earth Colonial Command was furious. Admiral Reeves sent message after message, demanding that Yale return to her assigned mission and stop collecting what he called strays and security risks. You were sent to chart mineral deposits, his latest message said, and his face on the screen was red with anger. You were not sent to start an interstellar orphanage, and every day you continue this madness, you put Earth at greater risk. Yale listened to the message and then deleted it without responding. Her first officer Marcus stood beside her and watched the message disappear. They are going to send someone to relieve you of command, he said. Maybe. This is serious, Yale, and you could lose everything. She turned to look at him and her eyes were calm. Marcus, do you remember why we joined the fleet? He thought about it for a moment. To explore and to protect and to represent the best of what humanity could be. And what are we doing right now? Marcus looked through the window at the cargo bay below where the Morwen family was building a garden in whatever containers they could find, and Fawn was watching them with curious eyes, and Torvik was teaching navigation to a group of young ensigns who hung on his every word. We are doing exactly that, he admitted. Yell nodded. Then let them come. The crew voted that night, and it was unanimous. Not one person wanted to abandon the refugees, and not one person wanted to return to simply mapping rocks in empty space. They sent their own message to Earth Command. The crew of the UE's Meridian stands with Commander Chun and with the people under our protection. And we will not abandon them. Admiral Reeves did not respond to this message, and the silence was somehow worse than his anger. But something else was happening across the galaxy, and it was something that Earth Command could not control. The word was spreading faster now, and it was changing as it traveled. The humans will help you. The humans do not ask for payment. The humans protect the ones no one else will protect. These words reached the ears of the powerful and the cruel, and they did. Not like what they were hearing, because power depends on fear, and cruelty depends on isolation. And the humans were offering something that threatened both. But the words also reached the ears of the broken and the lost and the forgotten, and for them the words were not a threat. They were a promise. In the cargo bay of the Meridian the garden was growing, and Fawn was learning to smile, and Torvik was teaching, and Velith was researching, and the Morwen children were playing. It was a small and fragile thing, this gathering of the wounded, but it was real, and it was growing. And somewhere in the darkness of space, the Cathari Dominion was watching and waiting and preparing to remind the galaxy why no one helped the prey. But the humans did not know fear the way the rest of the galaxy did, and they were about to prove it. The Cathari war fleet arrived without warning. 15 capital ships dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of human-controlled territory, and their weapons were hot, and their message was clear. The Dominion had come to collect what belonged to them. Commander Yael Chun was in the cargo bay, watching Fawn help the Morwen children water their garden when the alarm sounded, and she knew immediately that everything was about to change. She ran to the bridge and found her crew already at their stations. And on the main screen she saw the Cathar fleet spread out like a wall of black metal and death. "They are hailing us, Commander, Lieutenant," Park said, and his voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. "Put them through." The face that appeared on screen was something from a nightmare. The Cathari were tall and angular, with dark exoskeletons and eyes that held no warmth and no mercy, and the one speaking wore the marks of a high commander. "I am Warlord Keth Azur of the Dominion 7th Fleet," he said, and his voice was like ice scraping against stone. "You have taken what belongs to us, and you will return it now." Yael stood straight and met his gaze without flinching. "Nothing on this ship belongs to you." The warlord made a sound. That might have been laughter. "The Valari child is property of the Dominion, and the refugees you have collected include subjects who fled their proper places, and you will surrender them all, or you will face the consequences of your foolishness. And if I refuse, then we will take them by force, and we will destroy your ship, and we will visit your homeworld and teach your species what happens to those who interfere with Dominion affairs." The transmission ended and the bridge was silent. Marcus stepped forward and his face was pale. 15 ships against one. Yael, and we cannot win this fight. I know. Earth. Command is already sending messages telling us to comply, and they are saying that humanity cannot afford a war with the Dominion. I know that too. Yael turned to look at her crew, and she saw fear in their eyes. But she also saw something else, and it was the same thing she had seen when they voted to stay with the refugees. "I'm not going to order anyone to fight," she said, and her voice was calm. "This is my choice and my responsibility, but anyone who wants to leave can take a shuttle and go, and no one will think less of you." No one moved, no one spoke, and then Ensign Rivera, a young woman who had only been on the ship for 6 months, stepped forward. "With respect, Commander, we already made our choice, and we are not going to let you face this alone." The rest of the crew nodded, and Yael felt something warm spread through her chest. "All right then," she said, and she turned back to the screen showing the Dominion fleet. "Let us see what we can do." She sent a message to Earth, and it was not a request for orders or permission. It was a statement. "This is Commander Yao Chun of the UES Meridian, and I am informing Earth Command that we will not surrender the people under our protection, and if the Dominion attacks, we will fight. And I am asking for any ships that can reach us to come and stand with us." The response from Earth came quickly, and it was not what she expected. Admiral Sato appeared on screen, and his face was old and tired, but his eyes were sharp. "Commander Chun, you have created a diplomatic nightmare, and you have put humanity in a position we are not ready for." "I understand." "Sir, do you know what the Galactic Concord says about the Valari and the other species you are protecting? They say they are not worth the trouble, sir. And do you agree with that assessment?" Yael thought about Fawn learning to smile and Torvik teaching her crew and the Morwen garden growing in the cargo bay. "No, sir, I do not, Admiral." Sato was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice had changed. "Neither do I, Commander, and I am sending everything we have, Earth Fleet. Mobilized within hours. It was not a large fleet compared to the Dominion forces, but it was everything humanity had. And the ships burned toward the Meridian at maximum speed. But they were not the only ones coming. Torvik had sent messages through old smuggling networks, and ships began arriving from hidden corners of the galaxy. And they were battered and old, but they were armed, and they were ready to fight. The Morn had access to Dominion communication frequencies because they had been running from the Cathari for generations, and they knew their enemy better than anyone. Velith, the Crick scientist, had spent her career studying Cathari biology, and she knew their weaknesses. And then the Valari arrived. A small fleet of ships came out of hyperspace and took position alongside the Meridian, and this was something that had never happened before in recorded galactic history. The Valari did not fight, and everyone knew this because they were prey, and prey species did not stand and face their hunters. But here they were. The Valari elder sent a transmission to the Meridian, and her voice was old and tired, but steady. "You covered our child with warmth when no one else would help, and you did not ask what you would gain, and you did not calculate the cost." She paused, and Yael could see tears in her ancient eyes. "We have run for 1,000 years, and we have lost more than we can count, and we are tired of running. So we will stand with you, human, and we will cover you with everything we have left." Yael felt tears in her own eyes, and she did not try to hide them. "Thank you," she said, and the words felt small compared to what she was feeling. The combined fleet was still smaller than the Dominion force. But it was no longer just one ship against 15. It was a coalition of the broken and the wounded and the forgotten, and they were standing together for the first time. Warlord Cathazar saw the fleet assembling, and his confusion was visible, even through the cold mask of his face. "What is this madness?" he demanded. "This is what happens when you push people too far." Yal replied, "You will all die for nothing." Yal smiled, and it was not a happy smile, but it was real. "Maybe, but we will. Not die alone, and we will not die afraid. And that is something you will never understand." The warlord ended the transmission, and the Dominion fleet began to move forward. The battle for everything was about to begin. The first shots lit up the darkness of space. Like distant lightning, Warlord Cathazar had expected the strange coalition to break apart at the first sign of real combat, because that was what prey did, and that was what the weak did, and that was what the galaxy had always done when facing the Dominion. He was wrong. The human ships moved forward in a tight formation, and they were smaller than the Cathari vessels, but they were fast, and their weapons were precise. Commander Yao Chun stood on the bridge of the Meridian and watched the battle unfold on her tactical display. "Torvik, your ships hit their left flank and draw their attention." "Understood, Commander," the old Bessic replied, and his battered freighters swung wide and opened. Fire. It was not meant to destroy the Dominion ships, because the freighters did not have that kind of firepower, but it was meant to confuse and distract, and it worked. The Cathari commanders had never faced an enemy that fought like this, and they had never faced prey that refused to run. "Morwen team, give us their communications," Yahel ordered. The Morwen had spent generations listening to Cathari transmissions, and they knew the codes and frequencies, and now they fed false information into the Dominion network enemy. Ships turned to face threats that did not exist, and commanders shouted conflicting orders, and the perfect discipline of the Cathari fleet began to crack. "They are confused," Marcus reported, and there was wonder in his voice. "Good, and now we hit them hard." The Earth fleet arrived in the middle of the battle, and Admiral Sato wasted no time on speeches or greetings. His ships dove straight into the heart of the Dominion formation, and their guns blazed, and for the first time in the battle, the Cathari began to take real losses. Warlord Cathazar roared in fury and directed his flagship toward the Meridian. "Kill the human commander, and the rest will fall." But Veleth, the Crick scientist, had one more gift to offer. "Commander, I've analyzed their shield frequencies, and I believe I have found a weakness. Tell me." The Cathari exoskeletons are vulnerable to certain sonic frequencies, and their ships use similar technology for their shields, and if we adjust our weapons to match this frequency, we can cut through their defenses. Yao sent the information to every ship in the fleet, and within minutes, the tide of battle shifted. Dominion shields that had seemed unbreakable suddenly flickered and failed, and human weapons that had barely scratched the enemy now tore through hull plating. 3 Cathari ships exploded in rapid succession, and then a fourth, and the Dominion fleet began to pull back. But Warlord Cathazar was not ready to retreat. His flagship pushed forward alone, and its weapons focused on the Meridian, and Yael felt her ship shudder under the assault. "Shields at 40%. Park reported 30%. 20%. We cannot take much more of this, Commander." Yao gripped the arms of her chair and watched the massive warship bearing down on them. And then the Valari fleet moved. The small ships had stayed at the edge of the battle, providing support and staying out of direct combat, because even now, their instincts told them to run and hide. But when they saw the Meridian in danger, something changed. The Valari Elder's voice came over the communication channel, and it was steady and calm. "All ships protect the humans. 12 Valari vessels threw themselves between the Meridian and the Dominion flagship, and they were small and fragile, and they were never built for war. The first Valari ship took a direct hit and broke apart. The second followed moments later, but they kept coming. And they kept firing, and they bought the Meridian precious seconds. "Get us out of here," Yael shouted, and her ship's engines roared to life. The Meridian pulled away from the flagship's guns, and human reinforcements closed in from all sides. Warlord Kath Ezer found himself surrounded. His fleet was broken and burning, and his allies were fleeing, and now he faced the combined fury of a coalition that should not exist. "This is impossible," he snarled. Admiral Sato appeared on his screen, and the old human's face was hard. "Surrender your ship, and we will spare your crew." "The Dominion does not surrender. Then the Dominion dies today." The human ships opened fire, and the flagship's shields failed, and its weapons went silent. And Warlord Kath Ezer felt something he had never felt before in his long life of conquest and cruelty. He felt fear. The surviving Dominion ships fled into hyperspace, and they left their warlord behind, and they did not look back. Kath Ezer was taken prisoner, and his flagship was captured, and the battle was over, but the cost was high. The Meridian was badly damaged, and 6 human ships were destroyed, and the Valari had lost 8 vessels, including the ship of the Elder, who had promised to cover the humans with everything her people had left. Yael walked through the wreckage of her ship and saw the bodies of her crew, and she wept for them. She found Fawn hiding in the cargo bay, surrounded by the surviving Morlin, and the child ran to her and wrapped its small arms around her legs. "You are safe," Yael said, and her voice broke. "You are all safe now." The garden the Morlin had planted was damaged but not destroyed, and green shoots still reached toward the artificial light. It felt like a promise. Admiral Sato came aboard the Meridian that night, and he walked through the damaged corridors and saw the refugees and the wounded and the exhausted crew. He found Yael in the medical bay, holding Fawn's hand while the child slept. "You did something impossible today, Commander. We lost so many. Yes, and we will remember them, but you also proved something that the galaxy had forgotten." Yael looked at him with tired eyes. "What did we prove? That the prey can become the protector, and that the weak can become strong, and that kindness is not weakness." He put his hand on her shoulder. "You started something here, and I do not think it will ever stop." Through the window, Yael could see the stars, and somewhere out there the remaining Dominion forces were running, and the galaxy was watching, and everything was different now. She looked at Fawn sleeping peacefully, and she thought about the Valari Elder who had died protecting them. "We will make it worth it," she whispered. "I promise we will make it worth it." The Galactic Concord demanded an explanation. Representatives from 100 species gathered in the Great Hall on Nexus Station, and they wanted to know why humanity had upset the balance of power and challenged the Dominion, and done so for refugees and runaways, and a single alien child. Ambassador Priya Okonkwo stood before them, and she was not afraid. She was a tall woman with gray hair and kind eyes, and she had been chosen for this moment because she understood something that the rest of the galaxy had forgotten. "You have asked us why we did what we did," she began, and her voice carried through the vast chamber. "You want to know why we risked war with the Dominion, and why we sacrificed ships and lives for people who were not our own." The chamber was silent, and 1,000 alien eyes watched her. "The answer is simple." She paused and looked at the faces around her, and she saw confusion and curiosity, and in some cases contempt. Someone was cold, and we had a blanket. A murmur ran through the crowd, and the Kethari representative stood up with anger on his face. "You make a joke of serious matters, and the Dominion will not forget this insult." Priya turned to face him, and her eyes were steady. "It is not a joke, and is not an insult, and it is simply the truth." She walked forward, and her voice grew stronger. "For too long, this galaxy has accepted cruelty as the natural order, and you have watched species like the Valari suffer, and you have told yourselves that it was not your problem, and you have convinced yourselves that kindness is weakness. She pointed at the Cathari representative. "And your dominion has grown fat on that belief, and you have hunted the helpless because no one would stop you." The chamber erupted in noise, but Priya continued speaking. "But we stopped you, and we did not stop you, because we wanted your territory, or your resources, or your power, and we stopped you, because someone was cold and we had a blanket, and that is what humans do." The noise slowly died down, and Priya looked around the chamber one more time. If you find that confusing, then perhaps the problem is not with humanity, and perhaps the problem is with a galaxy that forgot what that simple act means. She walked out of the chamber, and she did not look back. The Galactic Concord debated for 3 days, and in the end, they did not condemn humanity, and they could not condemn humanity because too many species had watched the battle and seen what was possible. The Valari had fought, and that had never happened before. The broken and the wounded had stood together, and that had never happened before. And humanity had proven that kindness could be stronger than cruelty. Within a year, the Meridian Doctrine became official human policy. The words were written into law and broadcast across the galaxy. Any sapient being who reaches human space in need of protection will receive it without exception and without payment, and without hesitation. The damaged Meridian was repaired and renamed Meridian Station, and it became a hub for refugees and survivors, and the once forgotten. The garden the Morm had planted grew larger and spread through the station, and visitors from 100 worlds walked through it and marveled at the green leaves and the bright flowers. Torvik, the bees. Desic captain never left, and he became the head of navigation training, and his students went on to serve throughout human space. Valeth, the Crick scientist, founded a research institute on the station, and she dedicated her life to finding ways to help instead of harm. And Fawn grew up. The little Valari child, who had been wrapped in a jacket by a human commander, became the first Valari ambassador to Earth. On the day of the ceremony, Fawn stood before the United Earth Assembly and spoke about what humanity had given to the galaxy. "When Commander Chun found me, I was alone and afraid, and I had lost everything, and I had no hope left." Fawn's voice was clear and strong, and the opalescent skin that had once been dull now shone with health and life. She did not ask what I could give her, and she did not calculate whether I was worth the trouble, and she simply saw someone who was cold, and she covered me with warmth. Fawn looked at Yell, who was sitting in the front row, and there were tears on both their faces. That simple act changed everything, and it changed me, and it changed the galaxy, and it proved that compassion is the greatest strength of all. The years passed, and the Meridian Doctrine spread. Other species began to adopt similar policies, and new alliances formed, and the old order of predators and prey slowly began to crumble. The Cathari Dominion still existed, but it was smaller now and weaker, and the species they had once hunted were no longer easy targets. And across the galaxy, the question that Priya Okonkwo had planted in 1,000 minds began to grow. If the humans can do this, then why cannot we? Years later, a reporter came to visit the elderly Commander Yao Chun. She lived on Meridian Station, now in a small apartment overlooking the garden that had grown from a few containers in a cargo bay into a vast green space that covered an entire section of the station. The reporter asked her why she had done it, and why she had risked everything for one small alien child. Yao smiled, and the lines on her face were deep with years of consequence and joy. "When I found Fawn, that child was so cold and so afraid, and I had a jacket, and the choice was simple." She looked out the window at the garden below where Morwen children played, and Valari walked freely, and species that had never met before shared meals and stories. I did not think about politics or consequences, or what the galaxy would say, and I just knew that someone needed help, and I could give it. The reporter wrote down her words, and then asked one final question. "Do you think it was worth it, and all the lives lost and all the battles fought?" Yao was quiet for a long moment. "Ask Fawn," she finally said. Ask the Morin children who have never known fear, and ask the Valari, who can finally walk without looking over their shoulders, and ask all the people who found a home when the rest of the galaxy had abandoned them. She turned back to the window and her eyes were bright. They were not cold anymore, and that is all I ever wanted. Outside, the stars continued to shine, and ships came and went in the blanket that one human had wrapped around a frightened child had grown large enough to cover a galaxy, and it was still growing.